lectures. We still have several minutes for discussion on about all the 3 lectures, mainly the second, the last one. Please, your comment.
I'd like first to thank you both, and in fact also Carsten Wilke to showing that also the importance of this very high-level personalities in the history of the relation of the New Christians with power. And I have just very specific questions to James first. Regarding, you said it was, of course, you showed very clearly that that was not the papal brief from 1536 was not the first time thing. You had the Spanish example that you developed a lot, but you said that there were also other examples of groups that were recognized through this same kind of document. So I just want to have a couple more of examples. And another question is regarding what you said of the role of these procuratores in the penitentiary. Because well, you said that they would, the procurators would work for in specific cases, and also, of course, in these more far-fetched cases regarding the New Christians, but just some examples regarding that. And for Ana Paula, through this case of Manuel da Gama de Padua, you showed that he was very important to the prioritization of the had an important role in the discussions in Rome regarding the prioritization of the Inquisition. But I have a question that you didn't touch in that, but a document that I use a lot, and I think it is important, and I would like to know what you think about it. It's the Notícias Recônditas dos Modos de Proceder. Do you think Gama de Padua had something to do with it? I don't know, something. That's it. Thank you.
In the case of the 1535 brief, there's not similar documents for these other procurators, right? It's more a question of practice. It's a practice that evolved over the centuries to have, and once again I stress, the procurator was in Rome was traditionally a curial official, linked often to one of the many tribunals that existed in the Curia that had an expertise in this and that could be relied upon by people of his nation, right? Everybody in Rome defined themselves. They had a national church, they had a national hospice, they had a nation behind them. They were called upon to maneuver in the favor of people of their nation with any given typically tribunals, right? And the penitentiary was one in which they were able to receive sentences, right, of absolution in, it was called the inner forum, right? It was a tribunal of conscience. In the case of what this 1535 brief does is literally, without naming the term nation, it effectively places the New Christians in a very similar capacity or at a similar level to that of these national groups. This is what I was trying to establish. In the bibliography, I'll cite there are several studies that have come out on the role of these procurators, mainly in the Middle Ages. That's where most of the work has been done, but on and especially on German and Spanish procurators. But it's well, of course, it's very tricky. Just what is a German? It mainly meant people who are linked to a language, right? So people of proceeding from a place where, and the Germans had the Church of Santa Maria d'Arangelo. Right? I don't know if that kind of answers.
So, apropos Noticias Recônditas, no, I don't think Manuel da Gama de Padua did, and I think it's obviously a construction over a number of years that ends up in the hands of David Netto in London, and it's an amalgam of a number of different sort of polemical documents about the New Christian experience. and there's much debate about whether Le Plina Frère is sort of behind it or not. I think that they have enough. I think that it's possible that Pedro Álvarez Caldas, one of the other procurators, and this is purely conjecture, but he has the connection with Le Plina Frère, and he also seems to be extremely efficient at providing information and very well connected. I mean, my feeling is that Manuel de Gama de Padua is an organizer and a spokesman and a diplomat in a sense. He's very able to bridge these different groups, whereas I think some of the others are involved in different ways. I think that Noticias Reconditas is an amalgam of some things from Le Plina Frère and from other people that are around the Curia. I mean, Le Plina Frère is there, and he's talking. He sees himself as a middleman between the groups in a way, I think, and there are some documents in the Inquisition later on, in the early 1680s, where he's sort of interviewed, and he's almost got a slightly messianic complex. I think he's a very strange character. And he goes to see some of the cardinals, Cardinal Barberini, and talks at the court about some of the problems with the Inquisition. So I think that the New Christians are just adept at pulling in a number of different, a lot of different information that is available at the Curia, available to them, that they coordinate. But I think it's very hard to pin it down. I think Le Plina Frère would have advertised it had he been behind that, actually, from what I see or read of his letters and his sort of activities.
Okay, I have a question for Ana Paula. You mentioned the connections of Manuel Gama de Padua, and you mentioned that at a certain time there was a proposition of the general pardon that came from England through two Jesuit priests. What I would like to know is if you have found evidence of the involvement of the congregation as such in this movement towards the general pardon and the suspension of the Inquisition. And I'm asking this question because in the Dedução Cronológica e Analítica, the centerpiece of Pombal's combat and against the Jesuits, they are accused of being a part of the movement for the general pardon and the suspension of the Inquisition. Of course, they are accused of a lot of things, then there is no evidence for most of these allegations, but in this case I would like to know if you have found any specific connection with the congregation as such.
No, in the minutes of the Congregation of the Holy Office in Rome, there's no mention of Jesuit involvement. Through the official channels, there is no mention of any Jesuit involvement. In fact, Oliva sends a letter expressly forbidding their involvement. It's very hard to pin down Vieira's involvement. I mean, obviously he clearly knows quite a lot of what's going on, and he has, as his letters show. But in terms of actually seeing a broader involvement in Rome, it's hard to find it. Certainly in Portugal, it seems that they're behind it. The college in Évora is sort of organising petitions and things, so they have a lot of involvement. Yet, at a very, very high level, I haven't seen that, but doesn't mean that it's not there, and I think, I suspect that a lot of these things sort of happen unofficially in Rome, in a way. So I'm definitely interested to see what the reality is.
I would like to understand the notion of nation, because it seems to me that it's a survival game. I mean, it's a power game between the Pope and the local rulers, and the Jews are sort of in between they have to convert, and then they have to defend their identity as a community that was forced on them because they are Christians, but now they are separate, they are new Christians, they are not really Christians. And so this East Indian Company, was it established for a certain purpose, I mean, within the power struggle, or was it just an economic enterprise to go about?
So the identity question, is that part of the same question, or is that
right.
a question for...
Well, try, I mean...
Do you want to talk about... I mean, you talk first about identity.
Of course, it's a very problematic term, right? What constitutes a nation and how these nations are certain communities, for example, in Rome aren't accorded the full status of nations, right? You can call them parallel nations, which is rather what the new Christians were considered in Rome, right? While other nations are afforded or given a complete status, and they have permanent institutions there, right? They have diplomatic representatives, they have churches, they have hospices. It's tricky because sometimes it was generally linked to language, generally linked to ethnicity, but also linked to the states that were recognized by the Holy See.
I mean, yeah, in the period that I'm looking at, they're less keen. I mean, the Roman procurators, the powerful Roman procurators, are signed up in secret, and they do not identify themselves in any way and talk about protecting both their interests in Rome and their interests in Portugal and their family in Portugal. And they seem more keen. A number of them have taken on Italian or Roman nationality, in fact. And so their intent on marrying into the Roman nobility, and it's a different sense. So even though they are Portuguese, they don't use Nassau in the same way. But I think in Portugal there's a sort of it's obviously used in political ways, and I think the Inquisition want to claim the notion of being the sort of arbiter of what is Portuguese and what isn't Portuguese, and obviously other groups have different ideas. In terms of the Brazil Company, I think that it's an idea that's very current in the 1670s. So there's also an idea floating around with the Genoese merchants to make an East India Company, and the English in England, the New Christians, or some that remain Catholics and some that become Jews in London, are involved in the East India trade in diamonds, and they clearly stand to gain from a sort of East India Company in some ways, and are very involved in the English East India Company. But I think that there are good reasons for offering it to the Crown, and it was something that was offered again and again. And the protection of the India trade is a big sort of trope in from the Arch in 1621 that we see. You know, it's one of the great sort of hopes of Portugal to regain the trade. So I don't think it's that noteworthy in a way that they're offering to create a company. It was much.
Okay. Between the Pope and the nations.
I think yeah, everything's all politics or economics. They're all intertwined.
Please, last question.
Just a small question. How is seen in Rome? Do you have any information about how is seen someone that belongs to the Order of Christ, that is not only knight but is commandery, negotiating by the new Christians?
How he's seen in Rome?
How is seen?
No, because he doesn't. He isn't. I mean, he isn't acknowledged as a negotiator. His negotiation is behind the scenes lobbying. The actual negotiations that take place at the Curia are done by Francisco Azevedo, who is an old Christian abbot. But interestingly, and I would like to talk to Carsten about it, he started off at the embassy in Paris and comes to Rome with a Portuguese diplomat, and he claims to have been responsible for various political, Azevedo, for various political tracts that came out of Paris. And I think that he is obviously trying to sell himself to the New Christians as well as a procurator to act on their behalf. But I think it's interesting that Paris seems to have been, you know, he would have been in Paris around the same time as Villarreal, and it would be interesting to know how it compare. But in terms of the Order of Christ, in fact, one of the New Christian procurators, Duarte de Silva's nephew, is one of the New Christian procurators in Rome, and he is Order of Christ, and this is, but no one knows he's a procurator, but this is held up as a great thing. They're just talked about as Portuguese noblemen, and at this stage there's a hint that they might be New Christian, but that's quietly ignored in a way.
Thank you very much.
Only thing is, you will find not only, I remind you, perhaps, procurators, New Christian procurators in Rome, but also New Christian procurators in the courts, in the courts, and the basis is the same one, and this has to do, I think, with the contractual and corporative character both of the church and both of the kingdoms. And being contractual, you on the one hand has to obey your king, but the king or the pope has to listen to you. Mm-hmm. And then the issue is what is the way you can address to the king? And here you are two ways, basic way, as a nation, as a group, or as particulars who are suffering of injustice. And you will find in both cases in front of the crown or the Pope both allegations. And then finally the question is, who gives you the legitimacy to come as a procurator of a nation? And of course this is often the cause of many disputes, but basically, according to the contractual corporative political basis, if the sovereign listen to you and accept that you are representing this group and there is no other group or person who contravenes that, then ipso facto your claims represent the group you are claiming for. This is as far as I know. Mm. They were, but this is a flexible term. This is a flexible, means that they had to do with, the early modern, late medieval and early modern societies. Yes, yes, and sometimes it was the case.
But there were rules, I think.
So my last question is concerning with this question. We know the tensional relations between the procurator, a kind of procurator, Duarte Paz, and the Portuguese ambassador in Rome. What is the relation between the procurator, Padua, and the ambassador in Rome at that time, that I don't remember who it is, but there was...
yeah, there's famous, I mean, he was, first of all, there's no tensions.
I first know that Alberto, they were close friends.
No, it's the resident Gaspar de Freitas, who's first of all in London, coincidentally or not, and then travels to Rome. And he has been involved in the Conselho de Fazenda as well in Portugal. So I don't think they're friends, but I think that he's involved in the same world of trade and the sort of institutions to do with that in Portugal. There's then a falling out in some way. I think that he decides he's backing the wrong horse. And
as we are very late, I suggest that we continue talking about it with a cup of coffee.